My mill said our baby wasn't as exciting as her party. Now she's fighting my mom to be the number one grandma. I'm Lily, 28F, and I've been married to Bradley, 30M, for 3 years now. We're expecting our first child, and while this should be a joyous time, family drama is casting a shadow over everything. To understand the current situation, I need to go back to when Bradley and I first met. We were both fresh out of college, working entry-level jobs at the same tech company. I was immediately drawn to Bradley's quick wit and kind eyes. We bonded over late-night coding sessions and shared dreams of starting our own company someday. Bradley comes from a well-off family. His mother, Karen, 55F, is a successful real estate agent, and his father, Larry, 57M, owns a chain of car dealerships. They live in a sprawling mansion in the suburbs and have always given Bradley the best of everything. My family, on the other hand, is solidly middle class. My mom, Susan, 53F, is a high school teacher, and my dad, Claude, 54M, works as a postal worker. We lived in a modest 3-bedroom house, and while we never wanted for anything, luxury wasn't a part of our vocabulary. When Bradley brought me home to meet his parents for the first time, the contrast was stark. Karen's perfectly coiffed hair and designer clothes made me feel shabby in my off-the-rack dress. She greeted me with a plastic smile and a limp handshake. Throughout dinner, she peppered me with questions about my family, my career aspirations, and my hobbies. Each answer seemed to disappoint her more. After that disastrous first meeting, things only got worse. Karen would often forget to invite me to family events or seat me at the kids' table during holiday dinners. She'd make backhanded comments about my clothes or my job, always with a smile that never reached her eyes. Bradley tried to smooth things over, but he was caught in the middle. He loved his mother and couldn't see how cruel she could be. Or maybe he just didn't want to see it. Things came to a head when Bradley proposed. We'd been dating for 2 years, and I was over the moon when he got down on one knee during a hike to our favorite mountaintop. But my joy was short-lived. When we announced our engagement to his family, Karen's face fell. She pulled Bradley aside, and I overheard her saying, "Are you sure about this? You're so young. There are so many other fish in the sea." I was heartbroken. Bradley confronted his mother, telling her that I was the one he wanted to spend his life with. He told her that from now on, I would be his priority. Karen said she understood but couldn't promise to like me. That set the tone for our strained relationship ever since. My own mother, Susan, was thrilled about the engagement. She welcomed Bradley into our family with open arms, always making sure to have his favorite meals ready when we visited. She'd call him just to chat or send care packages to our apartment. Her enthusiasm was a stark contrast to Karen's cold indifference. Despite the family tension, Bradley and I got married in a beautiful ceremony 3 years ago. Karen attended, of course, but her smile seemed forced in all the photos. Susan, on the other hand, was beaming with joy, helping me with my dress and wiping away happy tears throughout the day. Now, 3 years into our marriage, I'm pregnant with our first child. When we found out, Bradley and I were ecstatic. We'd been trying for a baby for a few months, and seeing those 2 pink lines on the pregnancy test felt like a miracle. We decided to announce the news to both families at a joint dinner. Susan and Claude were overjoyed. Susan immediately started talking about knitting baby blankets and planning the nursery. Claude got a bit teary-eyed and gave Bradley a big bear hug. Karen and Larry's reaction was less enthusiastic. Karen managed a tight smile and a congratulations. Larry at least shook our hands warmly. But there was none of the excitement I'd hoped for from my in-laws. As my pregnancy progressed, the difference in the grandmothers-to-be became even more apparent. Susan calls every day to check on me. She's been buying baby clothes nonstop and is even talking about moving closer to us to help with childcare. While I appreciate her enthusiasm, it can be overwhelming at times. Karen, on the other hand, seems indifferent to the whole thing. She barely acknowledges my growing belly when we see her. When I tried to include her by asking for advice on morning sickness, she just shrugged and said, "It's been too long." I don't remember. Last month, we had a baby shower. Susan went all out, decorating the entire house in pastels, catering a lavish meal, and inviting all our friends and family. She'd spent weeks planning games and buying prizes. The love and effort she put into it touched my heart. Karen showed up an hour late to the shower, stayed for 20 minutes, and gave us a pack of diapers as a gift. I know it sounds ungrateful, but considering she drives a luxury car and lives in a mansion, it felt like a slap in the face. She didn't participate in any of the games and left early, claiming she had a headache. The tension came to a head last weekend at Bradley's cousin's wedding. We were all seated at the same table, Bradley, me, Susan, Karen, and a few other relatives. Everything was fine until someone brought up Karen's upcoming 30th wedding anniversary party. Karen lit up, talking animatedly about the venue she'd booked and the customary dress she'd ordered. She went on and on about the gourmet menu and the live band she'd hired. Susan, probably feeling left out, tried to steer the conversation back to the baby. She asked Karen if she'd thought about what she wanted to be called as a grandmother. Karen's response floored me. She said, "Oh, I don't really care about that. My anniversary party is much more exciting than someone else's baby." The table fell silent. I could feel tears welling up in my eyes. Bradley squeezed my hand under the table, but said nothing. Susan was visibly fuming, her face turning red as she clenched her napkin. I excused myself to the bathroom, where I broke down crying. I thought about all the times Karen had made me feel small and insignificant. I thought about how she was now extending that treatment to my unborn child. When I returned, Karen was acting like nothing had happened, chatting about her anniversary plans. I couldn't take it anymore and snapped, "How can you be so cruel? This is your grandchild we're talking about." Karen just shrugged and said, "It's not my baby. I didn't ask for a grandchild. My life doesn't revolve around your choices." At that point, Bradley finally spoke up. But instead of defending me, he said, "Let's all calm down. Mom's allowed to be more excited about her anniversary than our baby. It's a big milestone for her and Dad." I was shocked. I couldn't believe my husband was taking his mother's side. I left the wedding early, telling Bradley I'd get a cab home. He stayed behind, saying he didn't want to be rude to his cousin. When Bradley got home that night, we had a huge fight. I told him I couldn't believe he'd sided with his mother over his wife and unborn child. He said I was being overly sensitive and that I needed to accept that not everyone would be as excited about our baby as we were. The argument escalated, with years of pent-up frustrations coming out. I brought up how Karen had always treated me coldly, how she'd never made an effort to get to know me, and how she seemed to resent my presence in Bradley's life. I reminded him of all the times she'd excluded me or made snide comments about my background. Bradley countered by saying my mother was overbearing and made Karen uncomfortable with her constant baby talk. He accused me of always painting Karen as the villain without trying to see things from her perspective. We went to bed angry, and things have been tense ever since. Bradley's sleeping in the guest room, and we've barely spoken except about practical matters. I'm due in 2 months, and I'm terrified about bringing a baby into this environment. I love Bradley, but I'm starting to wonder if we can overcome this family drama. Am I overreacting? Should I just accept that Karen will never be the doting grandmother I'd hoped for? How do I move forward from here? Update 1: It's been a month since my last post, and a lot has happened. First, I want to thank everyone for their advice and support. It really helped me gain perspective on the situation. After a week of tension, with Bradley sleeping in the guest room and us barely speaking, I decided I couldn't go on like this. I left a note for Bradley asking him to meet me at our favorite coffee shop, the same one where we had our first date 6 years ago. Sitting in that familiar booth, surrounded by the scent of freshly ground coffee beans, we finally had a long, honest conversation. I explained how hurt I was by his mother's indifference and his failure to stand up for me. I told him about all the times I'd felt belittled and dismissed by Karen, and how it felt like he was choosing her over me and our baby. Bradley listened quietly, his hands wrapped around his mug of black coffee, 2 sugars, no cream, just like always. When I finished, he took a deep breath and admitted he'd been avoiding conflict, trying to keep everyone happy, but realized it wasn't working. He confessed that he'd always struggled with standing up to his mother. Growing up, Karen had high expectations for him, and he'd spent his whole life trying to meet them. The thought of disappointing her terrified him. We agreed to attend a couples counseling session, which was eye-opening. The counselor, a kind-faced woman named Dr. Martinez, helped us see how our own insecurities and family dynamics were contributing to the problem. Bradley realized he'd been so afraid of losing his mother's approval that he'd been neglecting my needs. I acknowledged that my desire for a perfect, happy family had made me overly sensitive to Karen's behavior. Dr. Martinez suggested we try a role-playing exercise. Bradley had to pretend to be me, expressing my feelings about Karen's behavior, while I played Bradley. It was uncomfortable at first, but as we got into it, I could see the realization dawning on Bradley's face. For the first time, he truly understood how Karen's actions had affected me. After the session, we went for a walk in the park where we used to have picnics when we were dating. As we sat on our favorite bench, watching the ducks in the pond, we made a plan. We decided to set some boundaries. Bradley promised to be more supportive and to talk to his mother about her behavior. I agreed to try and be less affected by Karen's actions and to give her space. The next big event was Karen's anniversary party 2 weeks ago. Bradley and I went together, presenting a united front. We practiced what we'd say if Karen made any insensitive comments. Karen was initially cold towards me, barely acknowledging my presence as she greeted guests in her glittering gold gown. As the night went on, something unexpected happened. I overheard Karen talking to her sister, Lisa, 58F, by the elaborate chocolate fountain. Karen was complaining about how Susan was taking over the baby preparations and how she felt pushed out. Lisa pointed out that Karen hadn't shown much interest in the baby, so it was natural for Susan to step in. This conversation gave me a new perspective. I realized that Karen might be feeling insecure about her role as a grandmother, especially given her strained relationship with me. It made me think back to something my dad had once told me about Karen. Apparently, she'd had a difficult relationship with her own mother-in-law, who had been very involved in Bradley's early childhood. Was history repeating itself? Gathering my courage, I approached Karen when she was alone, admiring the 5-tier anniversary cake. I told her I'd overheard her conversation and that I wanted to clear the air. I explained that while Susan was excited, we wanted both grandmothers to be involved in the baby's life. I admitted that her seeming indifference had hurt me, but I was willing to start fresh if she was. Karen was quiet for a moment, absently tracing the gold leaf decoration on the cake stand. Then she surprised me by tearing up, her carefully applied mascara starting to run. She confessed that she'd always felt like an outsider in our relationship. She said she'd been hurt when Bradley told her I would come first, and she'd responded by pulling away. She'd also admitted she was scared of being a grandmother, fearing she wouldn't be good at it. Her own mother had been distant and critical, and she was afraid of repeating that pattern. It wasn't a magical fix, but it was a start. We agreed to try and communicate better going forward. Karen even asked if she could come to my next ultrasound appointment. When I told Bradley about this conversation later that night, as we were driving home from the party, he was both relieved and guilty. He realized how much his initial handling of the situation had contributed to the ongoing tension. He promised to do better, to be the husband and soon-to-be father that I needed him to be. As for Susan, I had a talk with her too. We met for lunch at her favorite diner, the one where she used to take me for milkshakes after school. Over plates of greasy fries and club sandwiches, I explained that while I appreciated her enthusiasm, it was important to me that both grandmothers felt included. She was a bit hurt at first, her face falling as she pushed her fries around her plate. But eventually, she understood. She admitted that she'd gotten carried away with her excitement and promised to try and tone it down a notch. Things are still a bit awkward, but there's definite improvement. Karen has started asking about the baby and even bought us a beautiful cherrywood crib last week. When it was delivered, she came over to help Bradley assemble it. Watching them work together, laughing over the confusing instructions, made me feel hopeful for the future. Susan is trying to tone down her excitement a notch. She's limited her calls to every other day and has started asking about Karen, making an effort to include her in the preparations. Bradley and I are in a much better place now. He's been much more supportive and has started standing up to his mother when necessary. Last week, when Karen made a comment about the name we've chosen for the baby, Bradley gently but firmly told her that while we appreciated her input, the final decision was ours. We're both excited about the baby and feeling more unified in facing whatever challenges come our way. There's still work to do, but I'm feeling hopeful about the future. Our baby is due in a month, and I'm cautiously optimistic that we might actually have 2 happy grandmothers by then. Update 2. It's been 2 months since my last update, and our baby girl, Emma, arrived 3 weeks ago. The lead up to her birth and the weeks since have been a whirlwind of emotions and events. In the weeks before Emma's arrival, both Karen and Susan seemed to be making an effort. Karen attended my last 2 ultrasound appointments, tearing up when she heard Emma's heartbeat for the first time. She even organized a small family dinner to celebrate the impending birth, cooking Bradley's favorite lasagna recipe that she'd always refused to share with me before. Susan, true to her word, tried to give us some space, though she couldn't resist calling every other day to check in. She channeled her excitement into knitting a beautiful baby blanket, working on it during her lunch breaks at school. The day I went into labor was chaotic. My water broke in the middle of the night, and Bradley, bless him, was so nervous he put his shoes on the wrong feet. We called both sets of parents on the way to the hospital. Susan and Claude arrived within an hour, while Karen and Larry got there just before dawn. The labor was long and difficult. Bradley was amazing, staying calm and supportive throughout the 18-hour ordeal. We decided beforehand that we wanted it to be just the 2 of us in the delivery room, which turned out to be a wise decision. Knowing our parents were in the waiting room, supporting us from afar, gave me strength. Emma Catherine finally arrived at 3:47 p.m., weighing 7 pounds 6 ounces. The moment I held her in my arms, all the family drama seemed to melt away. Bradley cut the cord with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face. Both sets of grandparents arrived in the room shortly after Emma was born. I was exhausted but happy, propped up in the hospital bed with Emma in my arms. Seeing Karen's face when she held Emma for the first time was incredible. There were tears in her eyes as she whispered, "She's perfect." She looked at me and said, "You did good, Lily," the first genuine compliment she'd ever given me. Susan was equally moved, cooing over every tiny feature. She and Karen took turns holding Emma, comparing her nose to Bradley's baby pictures and her eyes to mine. For a moment, it seemed like all the past drama had melted away. But of course, real life isn't that simple. The first week at home was tough. Bradley took paternity leave, which was a huge help. He'd get up for the night feedings, changing Emma's diaper before bringing her to me to nurse. During the day, he'd handle the constant stream of visitors while I tried to nap. Susan came over every day, bringing home cooked meals and offering to help with housework. Her intentions were good, but it sometimes felt overwhelming. She'd reorganize the nursery or do load after load of laundry, chattering away about her plans for Emma's first Christmas or her ideas for baby's first Halloween costume. Karen, on the other hand, seemed unsure of her role. She visited twice that week, bringing lovely gifts for Emma, a silver rattle, a cashmere sweater set. But she seemed hesitant to hold the baby or offer help. I could see she was trying, but years of distance weren't easy to overcome. She'd sit stiffly in the armchair, watching as Susan confidently changed diapers or soothed Emma's cries. Things came to a head when both grandmothers were at our house at the same time, about 10 days after Emma was born. Susan was confidently burping Emma after a feed, giving advice about feeding schedules and sleep routines. Karen was sitting quietly, watching with a strange expression. Suddenly, Karen stood up and announced she was leaving. As she was putting on her coat, I followed her to the door and asked if everything was okay. She burst into tears, mascara running down her cheeks. She confessed that seeing Susan so comfortable with Emma made her feel like she'd never catch up, that she'd always be the other grandmother. It was a difficult moment, but also a breakthrough. I hugged Karen, ignoring the awkwardness that had always existed between us. I told her that Emma needed both her grandmothers. I assured her that there was no competition, and that she'd find her own way to bond with Emma. After that, we made a conscious effort to include Karen more. Bradley and I started asking for her advice on baby matters, even if we didn't always follow it. We made sure she had one-on-one time with Emma during her visits. Karen started to relax more, even letting Emma nap on her chest one afternoon while Bradley and I caught up on some much-needed sleep. We also had a gentle talk with Susan about giving Karen space to develop her own relationship with Emma. Susan was initially defensive but eventually understood. She started to step back a little, suggesting that Karen might want to feed Emma a bottle or change her diaper. Now, 3 weeks in, things are slowly improving. Karen visits every other day and is gaining confidence in handling Emma. She and Susan are civil to each other, and there have been moments of genuine warmth between them as they coo over their granddaughter. Bradley has been my rock through all of this. He's been actively mediating between his mother and me, and he stepped up amazingly as a father. Seeing him with Emma makes me fall in love with him all over again. Last night, I found him in the nursery, singing softly to Emma as he rocked her to sleep. It was a moment of pure joy in the midst of all the chaos. We're all learning and adjusting. It's not perfect, and there are still moments of tension, but we're moving in the right direction. Emma is the center of our world, and it's beautiful to see how she's bringing our families together, one tiny step at a time. Update 3. It's been 6 months since Emma was born, and I wanted to give a final update on our family situation. The past half year has been a journey of growth, not just for Emma, but for our entire family. We've had our ups and downs, but overall, things have improved significantly. Karen has truly embraced her role as a grandmother. She visits regularly and has formed a beautiful bond with Emma. It's heartwarming to see her confidence grow with each visit. Last month, she even offered to babysit for a weekend so Bradley and I could have a much-needed getaway. It was a big step for her, and it meant the world to us. When we came back, we found Karen and Emma cuddled up on the couch, both fast asleep with a storybook open on Karen's lap. Susan has learned to step back a bit, giving Karen space to be involved. The two of them have even started to form a cautious friendship. Last week, I walked in on them laughing together over Emma's attempts to crawl. Susan was showing Karen photos of Bradley's first attempts at crawling, and they were comparing notes on baby milestones. Bradley continues to be an amazing partner and father. He's been crucial in maintaining the delicate balance between our mothers. He's also taken the lead in setting boundaries when needed, which has been a relief for me. When both grandmothers started competing over who would host Emma's first birthday party, Bradley stepped in and suggested we have a joint celebration at our house instead. We've had a few bumps along the way. There was a tense moment at Emma's christening when both grandmothers wanted to hold her during the ceremony. We solved it by having them take turns, which ended up being a lovely symbol of our united family. Karen held Emma as she was baptized, then handed her to Susan for the final blessing. It was a moment that brought tears to everyone's eyes. Emma's first Christmas was another potential minefield, but it turned out better than we could have hoped. We decided to host Christmas dinner at our house, inviting both sets of grandparents. Karen and Susan worked together to prepare the meal, with Karen making her famous roast turkey and Susan bringing her traditional apple pie. There was a moment of tension when they disagreed on how to make the gravy, but they managed to compromise, resulting in what Bradley declared was the best gravy he'd ever tasted. Emma's first birthday is coming up next month, and surprisingly, Karen and Susan have joined forces to plan the party. They have their disagreements, but they're working through them civilly. Karen is in charge of decorations, while Susan is handling the food. They've been meeting for coffee every week to discuss plans, and I've noticed they're starting to talk about other things too, their favorite TV shows, book recommendations, even sharing gardening tips. As for me, I've learned a lot about patience, understanding, and the importance of communication. I've realized that family relationships are complex and ever-evolving. What matters most is the effort we all put in to make things work. Emma is thriving, surrounded by love from all sides. She lights up when she sees either of her grandmothers, and it's beautiful to watch. She's starting to develop her own personality. She has Karen's determined streak and Susan's infectious laugh. It's amazing to see bits of both families reflected in her. Looking back at my original post, I'm amazed at how far we've come. It hasn't been easy, and we still have work to do, but I'm proud of how our family has grown and adapted. There are still occasional tensions, like when Karen and Susan disagree on parenting advice, but we're all getting better at communicating and compromising. To anyone dealing with similar family drama, I want to say, don't give up hope. With patience, communication, and a willingness to understand each other, things can get better. It's not always easy, but it's worth it for the sake of your family and your own peace of mind. Thank you all for your support throughout this journey. Your advice and encouragement have been invaluable. Here's to hoping for many more years of family harmony and happiness.